I've been having deep thoughts about a certain subject as of late. Let's say Winston Smith was tasked one day to make a profile for the Big Brother on a dating website. What would he have to write in order to sell members of the other sex what the Big Brother is like? I mean, first name Big, last name Brother, I guess. He likes watching you. Always. His favorite thing to say, war is peace, freedom is slavery, dating me is strength. Favorite song, this is the most important thing. Favorite song, Every Breath You Take by Police. Was it by Police? I could be wrong, but maybe I'm not. But who cares? I mean, it's funny, right? To think about that. I mean, this is 1984, the novel and the year it's happening, so to speak. And in the actual year of 1984, of the real world, that song was a smash hit. So it's perfect. The Big Brother should have that one song play constantly in megaphones, set up in strategic positions in the town or the cities, playing again 24 hours a day. I mean 24 hours a week. It's his own equivalent of Everything is Awesome from the Lego Movie. I am losing my mind. Oh boy. Right then, so last time we were in good old Oceania. Winston Smith visited the slums and the proles. He bought a couple of drinks, a couple of half liters of beer to a senior citizen whose bladder then proceeded to explode. He also met a guy in his 60s in a shop he visited at some other point in time, and he fancied the idea of renting the attic of that very shop in order to escape from the ever-looming presence of the Big Brother and his telescreens, because television is bad. On his way home, he met this random girl with dark hair, which he had met before, and he goes full-on paranoia mode, thinking she's a spy who's been following him and stalking him. And last we saw him, he was being consumed by even more things, even more thoughts, things about thought thingies, about despair. He was slowly going insane, essentially. That's what I am trying to convey. Hey, much like myself. So, by the way, if you think I am being a bit more energetic than usual, is because, well, I am not recording in my usual bedroom. I am at my mother's house, which has actual internet connection, and that makes me happy. It's a temporary solution, to be sure, but until the problem is fixed, I have to rely on this accommodation, and I am fine with that. So, with all of that said, I am going to read you chapter 1, that's not a number, chapter 1 of the second part of George Orwell's 1984. Here we go. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston had left his cubicle to go to the lavatory. A solitary figure was coming towards him from the other end of the long, brightly lit corridor. It was the girl with dark hair. Well, I see we are not wasting any time for a change. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside the junk shop. As she came nearer, he saw that her right arm was in a sling, not noticeable at a distance because it was of the same color as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging round one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of novels were wrought in. And that is in between apostrophes. It was a common accident in the fiction department. I do love the fact that every department of every ministry in this dystopian future has manual laborers in them, even though it would make no sense for them to have manual laborers. But then again, somebody has to make those books. They were perhaps 4 meters apart when the girl stumbled and fell almost flat on her face. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her knees. Her face had turned a milky yellow color against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on this with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. Are you sure you didn't mean to say appalling? Because appealing expression doesn't exactly convey what is the emotion the face of said girl is going for, so this might be a legitimate mistake that I found in this old novel live as I'm reading it. Make that of what you will. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him, again in his own mind. In front of him also was a human creature, in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had instinctively started forward to help her. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt?" he said. "Are you stupid?" "It's nothing. My arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke as though her heart were fluttering. Orwell, buddy, old pal, old friend, old chum. What is it with you and the way you write women in this novel? I am not going to bother mentioning again how deeply offensive all those physical descriptions of women were, whereas the men that you describe don't really come even close in being described as horrifying creatures, with the sole exception of that Rutherford fellow, which shall never be mentioned again. But it's either that, or you have a woman with a fluttering heart as soon as a man helps her out. I am not enjoying the implications. Again, perhaps I am reading in too deep. But, you know, the simple fact that this novel is old and it was a product of its time should not be considered an excuse from criticism. Am I wrong in this? I'll let you decide. She had certainly turned very pale. You haven't broken anything? No, I'm all right. It hurt for a moment, that's all. There are people outside, by the way. This is a relatively... well, it is a fairly crowded area. It's in the middle of the town, whereas my house is usually in the outskirts, so it's fairly isolated and tranquil. So if you hear noise in the background, do keep that in mind. She held out her free hand to him, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her color, and appeared very much better. "It's nothing," she repeated shortly. "I only gave my wrist a bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade!" And with that she walked on in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had really been nothing. The whole incident could not have taken as much as half a minute. Not to let one's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had acquired the status of an instinct. And in any case, they had been standing straight in front of a telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise. For in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping her up, the girl had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it to his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. While he stood at the urinal, he managed, with a little more fingering, to get it unfolded. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written in it. For a moment, he was tempted to take it into one of the water closets and read it at once, but that would be shocking folly, as he well knew. There was no place where you could be more certain that the telescreens were watched continuously. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually among the other papers on the desk, put on his spectacles and hitched the speakwrite towards him. 5 minutes, he told himself. 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped in his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he had engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures not needing close attention. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have some kind of political meaning. So far as he could see, there were 2 possibilities. One, much the more likely, was that the girl was an agent of the thought police, just as he had feared. He did not know why the thought police should choose to deliver their messages in such a fashion, but perhaps they had their reasons. The thing that was written on the paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide, a trap of some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept raising its head, though it tried vainly to suppress it. This way, that the message did not come from the thought police at all, but from some kind of underground organization. Perhaps the Brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind in the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. It was not till a couple of minutes later that the other, more probable explanation had occurred to him. And even now, though his intellect told him that the message probably meant death, still that was not what he believed, and the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and it was with difficulty that he kept his voice from trembling as he murmured his figures into the speakwrite. He rolled up the completed bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighed, and drew the next batch of work towards him, with the scrap of paper on top of it. He flattened it out. On it was written, in a large, unformed handwriting, "I love you." What? What? What is this? I am reading it, but I refuse to believe it. Georgie boy! George. May I call you Joe? No? It's okay. Mr. Orwell, sir. What's up with this book? Are you... I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just jumping to conclusions here, but after reading 113 pages of your book, I am seriously having doubts about the veridicity and credibility of your dystopian future used as a commentary about the fears that tomorrow brings and totalitarianism, if you're going to the route of turning your important and inspirational sci-fi novel into a self-titillating, male-fulfilling fantasy? Is this what's becoming of 1984? Are we really doing this? I love you. So, Winston Smith spends an entire paragraph pondering what this letter might be about, instead of actually seeing what this letter is about, and then the payoff to that is, I love you. I'm girl, I am meant to love the man. Oh, you probably cannot hear my fingers tapping in impatience. Here, let me fix it for you. There you go. I mean, I knew that Terry Gilliam's Brazil was taking inspiration from 1984, but I would have assumed that, I don't know, an important novel like this wouldn't resort into a high school level of love letter. I mean, this is a high school love letter. This is just, hey, senpai, sama, have you noticed me yet? Can we date? Let's meet us beneath the sakura tree in full bloom, and I love you. I'm sorry, but this really takes me aback. This is... Okay. Wow. Wow, Georgie boy. Are you sure you didn't write this entire novel because you are sexually frustrated? Let's continue, shall we? For several seconds he was too stunned even to throw the incriminating thing into the memory hole. When he did so, although he knew very well the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it once again, just to make sure that the words were really there. You know what bugs me the most about this? This novel right here, and this very specific moment in this novel is the reason why we have so many young adult romances set in a dystopian future. It's because of you, George Orwell. You did this. Oh boy. For the rest of the morning, it was very difficult to work. What was even worse than having to focus his mind on a series of niggling jobs was the need to conceal his agitation from the telescreen. I mean, okay, I'm sorry if I continue to beat this horse dead on the ground, but I just happened to make a joke about a dating website at the beginning of this reading and also at the end of the previous video. And now it all came true. I did not read this novel before, I assure you, so this is such a happy coincidence? Question mark? Okay, this is the last time I'm going to mention it up until the novel mentions it again, that is. So, I'm trying. I'm really trying here, but this really throws such a giant wrench into my enjoyment of this. Yes, even more than the pacing problems, and even more than the occasional sexist or racist description, this really throws me into a loop. Lunch in the hot, crowded, noise-filled canteen was torment. He had hoped to be alone for a little while during the lunch hour, but as bad luck would have it, the imbecile Parsons, that's a person's name, flopped down beside him. Oh, let me guess, Parsons is your high school best friend who constantly nags you about getting a girlfriend. Oh no. My perception of this book is completely compromised. The tang of his sweat almost defeating the teeny smell of stew, and kept up a stream of talk about the preparations for Hate Week. Hey, Hate Week! That's something we have on Twitter. Except it's, Hate Year. More than Hate Week. And it's every year. He was particularly enthusiastic about a papier-mâché model of Big Brother's head, 2 meters wide, which was being made for the occasion by his daughter's troop of spies. The irritating thing was that in the racket of voices Winston could hardly hear what Parsons was saying, and was constantly having to ask for some fatuous remark to be repeated. Just once he caught a glimpse of the girl at a table with 2 other girls at the far end of the room. She appeared not to have seen him, and he did not look in that direction again. Somewhere on the internet there has to be an alternative universe fanfiction of 1984 set in high school. And everybody is an anime archetype. I would read that. No, I'm serious. I would read that live in one of my Dramatis Lectio shows. I am not joking. If you know of such a fanfiction, if you know of such abysmal abortion, please notify me. I will read it. The irritating thing was that in the... Oh, wait, I've already read that. She appeared... no, that's... Yes, I am at the end of the paragraph. The afternoon was more bearable. Immediately after lunch there arrived a delicate, difficult piece of work which would take several hours and necessitated putting everything else aside. It consisted in falsifying a series of production reports of 2 years ago in such a way as to cast discredit on a prominent member of the inner party who was now under a cloud. This was the kind of thing that Winston was good at, and for more than 2 hours he succeeded in shutting the girl out of his mind altogether. Then the memory of her face came back. Must not think sexy thoughts, must not think sexy thoughts, must not think sexy thoughts. I think I botched that phrase 2 times before I eventually got it right. Oh well. Then the memory of... I keep losing track of my point in the book. Oh, damn you. Damn you, Orwell High School. Orwell High School, that should be an anime. Oh my gosh. Oh, what have I done? Then the memory of her face came back, and with it a raging, intolerable desire to be alone. George-sama, could you please not? Could you please not let us know about your masturbation schedule? This is driving me nuts. Until he could be alone, it was impossible to think this new development out. Tonight was one of his nights at the community center. He wolfed another tasteless meal in the canteen, hurried off to the center, took part in the solemn foolery of a discussion group, played 2 games of table tennis, swallowed several glasses of gin, and sat for half an hour through a lecture entitled Hingsok in Relation to Chess. That sounds like a ball. His soul writhed with boredom. But for once he had had no impulse to shirk his evening at the center. At the sight of the words, "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and the taking of minor risks suddenly seemed stupid. It was not till 23 hours, when he was home and in bed, in the darkness where you were safe even from the telescreen so long as you kept silent, that he was able to think continuously. It was a physical problem that had to be solved. How to get in touch with the girl and arrange a meeting. He did not consider any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. He knew that it was not so, because of her unmistakable agitation when she handed him the note. Obviously, that's obviously not obliviously. She had been frightened out of her wits, as well she might be. Nor did the idea of refusing her advances even cross his mind. Only 5 nights ago he had contemplated smashing her skull in with a cobblestone. That will be an awkward discussion. But that was of no importance. He thought of her naked, youthful body as he had seen it in his dream. This is getting ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to be blunt here. I knew something along these lines was coming in this novel. Again, it's the main inspiration for Brazil and about 500,000 other dystopian science fiction films. But I was expecting the romance in this oh so important, meaningful, thematically rich novel about the dangers of totalitarianism and thought control and the media and all of that to be a little less high school level, or middle school level in this case, if you know what I'm referring to. Even the part of the guy dreaming about the girl was much better handled, much more powerful in Terry Gilliam's Brazil than this novel could ever hope for. And I'm not just referring about the power of the medium of cinema, of actually giving shape and visual tangibility to thoughts occurring in a novel. I'm talking about just the basic description here. I mean, what sounds better in your head? The guy having wet dreams about the naked body of a girl, which by the sounds of it is much younger than him, or the metaphorical representation of the guy's passion and lust in some visionary manner? For example, him coming to a rescue with giant metallic wings. My gosh, this is pissing me off! You have no idea. He had imagined her a fool like all the rest of them, her head stuffed with lies and hatred, her belly full of ice. A kind of fever seized him at the thought that he might lose her. The white youthful body might slip away from him. What he feared more than anything else was that she would simply change her mind if he did not get in touch with her quickly. But the physical difficulty of meeting was enormous. It was like trying to make a move at chess when you were already mated. Whichever way you turned, the telescreen faced you. Actually, all the possible ways of communicating with her had occurred to him within 5 minutes of reading the note. But now, with time to think, he went over them one by one, as though laying out a row of instruments on a table. Obviously, the kind of encounter that had happened this morning could not be repeated. If she had worked in the records department, it might have been comparatively simple. But he had only a very dim idea whereabouts in the building the fiction department lay. This is a clunky sentence, if I ever read one out loud, and he had no pretext for going there. If he had known where she lived and at what time she left work, he could have contrived to meet her somewhere on her way home, like a creepy stalker does. But to try to follow her home was not safe, because it would mean loitering about outside the ministry. We have severe policies against loitering here, which was bound to be noticed. As for sending a letter through the mails, it was out of the question. By a routine that was not even secret, all letters were opened in transit. Actually, few people ever wrote letters. For the messages that it was occasionally necessary to send, there were printed postcards with long lists of phrases, and you struck out the ones that were inapplicable. In any case, he did not know the girl's name, let alone her address. Finally, he decided that the safest place was the canteen. If he could get her at a table by herself, somewhere in the middle of the room, not too near the telescreens, and with a sufficient buzz of conversation all around. If these conditions endured for, say, 30 seconds, it might be possible to exchange a few words. For a week after this, life was like a restless dream. On the next day, she did not appear in the canteen until he was leaving it, the whistle having already blown. Presumably, she had been changed onto a later shift. They passed each other without a glance. On the day after that, she was in the canteen at the usual time, but with 3 other girls and immediately under a telescreen. Then, for 3 dreadful days, she did not appear at all. His whole mind and body seemed to be afflicted with an unbearable sensitivity, a sort of transparency, which made every movement, every sound, every contact, every word that he had to speak or listen to, an agony. Even in the sleep he could not altogether escape from her image. He did not touch the diary during those days. If there was any relief, it was in his work, in which he could sometimes forget himself for 10 minutes at the stretch. He had absolutely no clue as to what had happened to her. There was no enquiry he could make. She might have been vaporized. She might have committed suicide. She might have been transferred to the other end of Oceania. Worst and likeliest of all, she might simply have changed her mind and decided to avoid him. Oh, worst of all, you say? Oh yes, Winston, because it is all about you, isn't it? Oh, she could be dead. Oh, she could be transferred against her will and her life could be oh so miserable. But none of those scenarios will be as bad as her not focusing entirely on me. This is all about me, you guys. I am the real villain here. That was the twist all along. I have to be honest with all of you, because, as you know, I am nothing but honest when it comes to these readings that I do. I am starting to really grow wary of all this mental masturbation that the main character is going through. 90% of this book so far has been him thinking, pondering, and overthinking about everything and nothing at the same time, more than something actually ever happening. And I am starting to really not enjoy it anymore. Sure, the writing is qualitatively good, comparatively speaking nice, it has a flourish to it, and all of that. It uses words, okay? It uses words. But does it really need to be this descriptive? Does it really need to have this many words? Especially since most of the times they keep going towards the same point over and over again? No. In my humble opinion of a guy reading a book in 2018, it does not. Look, tastes have changed over the decades. The writing of today is a lot more different than it was back then. That's a change that sometimes is for the worst, but most of the times it's for the best. Narratives and books and novels tend to be more streamlined nowadays. They tend, well, at least the good ones, they tend not to waste too much time with pointless prose. And while this is still not exactly purple prose, the accumulation of all of the prose that I have been subjected to so far is really wearing on me. It is all about me! Me. Winston Smith, you are not a fun character to follow. I'll say that much. The next day, she reappeared. Her arm was out of the sling, and she had a band of sticking plaster round her wrist. The relief of seeing her was so great that he could not resist staring directly at her for several seconds.
Every breath you take.
I am terrible. On the following day, he very nearly succeeded in speaking to her. When he came into the canteen, she was sitting at a table well out from the wall, and was quite alone. Not just alone, she was quite alone. That was such an important adjective to have here. It was early, and the place was not very full. The queue edged forward till Winston was almost at the counter, then was held up for 2 minutes because someone in front was complaining that he had not received his tablet of saccharin. But the girl was still alone when Winston secured his tray and began to make for her table. He walked casually towards her, his eyes searching for a place at some table beyond her. She was perhaps 3 meters away from him. Another 2 seconds would do it. Then a voice behind him called, "Smith!" He pretended not to hear. "Smith's son!" repeated the voice more loudly. It was no use. "It's no use!" He turned round. A blonde-headed, silly-faced young man named Wilshire, whom he barely knew, was inviting him with a smile to a vacant place at his table. It was not safe to refuse. "I mean, this is Wilshire we're talking about. He's the cool kid in this high school. Drama. This is the chance of a lifetime. I get to sit with the cool kid, Wilshire." Plus, his parents are rich, so you know he's good company. After having been recognized, he could not go and sit at a table with an unattended girl. There you go, I can read. It was too noticeable. He sat down with a friendly smile. The silly blonde face beamed into his. Winston had a hallucination of himself smashing a pickaxe right into the middle of it. The girl's table filled up a few minutes later. But she must have seen him coming towards her, and perhaps she would take the hint. Next day, he took care to arrive early. This is a comedy show, isn't it? This is a romantic comedy. It's that one girl I like. Today, I will finally master the courage to talk to her. Oh no! This guy gets in the way. He invites me at his table and I miss my chance. Woe is me. Okay, but there is always next day, and the next day, and the next day. Today, I will try again, and I will succeed. I will never give up. I gotta believe. What is wrong with me? Okay. Sure enough, she was at a table in about the same place, and again alone. The person immediately ahead of him in the queue was a small, swiftly moving, beetle-like man with a flat face and tiny, suspicious eyes. Okay, you know what I said earlier about only women and Rutherford having terribly unflattering physical descriptions. Never mind. Orwell hates humanity as a whole. As Winston turned away from the counter with his tray, he saw that the little man was making straight for the girl's table. His hopes sank again. There was a vacant place at a table further away, but something in the little man's appearance suggested that he would be sufficiently attentive to his own comfort to choose the emptiest table. You know, I was joking earlier about the comedy show, but then the novel goes on to just do that. Amazing. Outstanding. With ice at his heart, Winston followed. It was no use unless he could get the girl alone. At this moment, there was a tremendous crash. The little man was sprawling on all fours. His tray had gone flying. 2 streams of soup and coffee were flowing across the floor. He started to his feet with a malignant glance at Winston, whom he evidently suspected of having tripped him up. But it was all right. 5 seconds later, with a thundering heart, Winston was sitting at the girl's table. Will our hero confess his love to the dream girl that he likes and whatnot? Stay tuned for the next heart-throbbing episode of 2 Hearts and a Big Brother. Jesus. He did not look at her. He unpacked his tray and promptly began eating. It was all important to speak at once, before anyone else came, but now a terrible fear had taken possession of him. A week had gone by since she had first approached him. She would have changed her mind. She must have changed her mind. It was impossible that this affair should end successfully. Such things did not happen in real life. He might have flinched altogether from speaking if, at this moment, he had not seen Ampleforth, which is another person's name, the hairy-eared poet, wandering limply round the room with a tray, looking for a place to sit down. In his vague way, Ampleforth was attached to Winston, and would certainly sit down at his table if he caught sight of him. There was perhaps a minute in which so to act. Both Winston and the girl were eating steadily. The stuff they were eating was a thin stew, actually a soup, of haricot beans. I really don't care about the soup, damn it. In a low murmur, Winston began speaking. Neither of them looked up. Steadily, they spooned the watery stuff into their mouths, and between spoonfuls exchanged the new necessary words in low, expressionless voices.
What time do you leave work?
18:30.
Where can we meet?
Victory Square, near the monument.
It's full of telescreens.
It doesn't matter if there's a crowd.
Any signal?
No, don't come up to me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me, just keep somewhere near me.
What time?
19 hours.
All right.
Yes, I decided this is Winston's voice from now on. Ampleforth failed to see Winston and sat down at another table. They did not speak again, and so far as it was possible for 2 people sitting on opposite sides of the same table, they did not look at one another. The girl finished her lunch quickly and made off, while Winston stayed to smoke a cigarette, or as they call it in Britain, a fag. No, that's a true name for cigarettes in Britain. Look it up. Winston was in Victory Square before the appointed time. He wanted round... He wondered... That's better. Oh wait, he's immediately at the allotted place. Right at the beginning of the next paragraph. What? Are you not going to waste 20 minutes telling me how he feels? No? Okay. That's good. I'm glad. He wandered around the base of the enormous fluted column, at the top of which Big Brother's statue gazed southward towards the skies where he had vanquished the Eurasian aeroplanes with his I-beams, I'm sure. The Histasian aeroplanes it had been a few years ago. In the Battle of Airstrip 1. Airstrip 1? Really? That's the best name you could come up with? In the street in front of it, there was a statue of a man on horseback, which was supposed to represent Oliver Cromwell. At 5 minutes past the hour, the girl had still not appeared. Again, the terrible fear seized upon Winston. She was not coming. She had changed her mind. He walked slowly up to the north side of the square and got a sort of pale-colored pleasure from identifying St. Martin's Church, whose bells, when it had bells, had chimed, "You owe me 3 farthings." Then he saw the girl standing at the base of the monument, reading or pretending to read a poster which ran spirally up the column. It was not safe to go near her until some more people had accumulated. There were telescreens all round the pediment, but at this moment there was a din of shouting and a zoom of heavy vehicles from somewhere to the left. Suddenly, everyone seemed to be running across the square. The girl nipped nimbly round the lions at the base of the monument and joined in the rush. Winston followed. As he ran, he gathered from some shouted remarks that a convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. Already a dense mass of people was blocking the south side of the square. By the way, things are happening. This is exciting, you guys. Winston, at normal times, the kind of person who gravitates to the outer edge of any kind of scrimmage, shoved, butted, squirmed his way forward into the heart of the crowd. Soon he was within arm's length of the girl, but the way was blocked by an enormous sprawl and an almost equally enormous woman, presumably his wife, who seemed to form an impenetrable wall of flesh. Again, this image generates mirth in my mind, and not tension. This seems like a Monty Python sketch waiting to begin. Winston wriggled himself sideways and with a violent lunge managed to drive his shoulder between them. For a moment it felt as though his entrails were being ground to pulp between the two muscular hips. So silly. Then he had broken through, sweating a little. He was next to the girl. They were shoulder to shoulder, both staring fixedly in front of them. A long line of trucks with wooden-faced guards, armed with submachine guns, standing upright in each corner, was passing slowly down the street. In the trucks, little yellow men in shabby greenish uniforms were squatting, jammed close together. Their sad Mongolian faces gazed out over the sides of the trucks, utterly incurious. Occasionally, when a truck jolted, there was a clank-clank of metal. All the prisoners were wearing leg irons. Ooh, fashionable this season. Truckloaded after truckload of the sad faces passed. Winston knew they were there, but he saw them only intermittently. The girl's shoulder and her arm right down to the elbow were pressed against him. Her cheek was almost near enough for him to feel its warmth. She had immediately taken charge of the situation, just as she had done in the canteen. She began speaking in the same expressionless voice as before, with lips barely moving, a mere murmur easily drowned by the din of voices and the rumbling of the trucks. "Can you hear me?"
Yes?
"Can you get Sunday afternoon off?"
Yes?
"Then listen carefully. You'll have to remember this. Go to Paddington Station and meet the Paddington Bear." Oh, that would be a weird crossover. Paddington comes to London, the city of London, only to find out it's a dystopian, totalitarian regime. That's somehow happening in 1984. That's a fan fiction waiting to happen, I swear to God. With a sort of military precision that astonished him, she outlined the route that he was to follow. A half-hour railway journey. Turn left outside the station, 2 kilometers along the road, a gate with the top bar missing, a path across a field, a grass-grown lane, a track between bushes, a dead tree with moss on it. It was as though she had a map inside her head. "Can you remember all that?" she murmured finally.
Yes?
The next day, he got lost. Oh, brother. Okay, we're almost at the end of this godforsaken chapter that ruins the entire book. You turn left, then right, then left again, and the gate's got no top bar. Yes, what time? About 15, you may have to wait. I'll get there by another day. Are you sure you remember everything?
Yes?
No, he doesn't. Then get away from me as quick as you can. She need not have told him that, but for the moment they could not extricate themselves from the crowd. The trucks were still filing past, the people still insatiably gaping. At the start there had been a few boos and hisses, but it came only from the party members among the crowd, and had soon stopped. The prevailing emotion was simply curiosity. Foreigners, whether from Eurasia or from East Asia, were a kind of strange animal. One literally never saw them except in the guise of prisoners, and even as prisoners one never got more than a momentary glimpse of them. Nor did one know what became of them, apart from the few who were hanged, as war criminals. The others simply vanished, presumably into forced labor camps. The round Mongol faces had given way to faces of a more European type, dirty, bearded, and exhausted. From over scrubby cheekbones, eyes looked into Winston's, sometimes with strange intensity, and flashed away again. The convoy was drawing to an end. In the last truck he could see an aged man, his face a mass of grizzled hair, standing upright with wrists crossed in front of him, as though he were used to having them bound together. It was almost time for Winston and the girl to part, but at the last moment, while the crowd still hemmed them in, Her hand felt for his and gave it a fleeting squeeze. Ah! Romance! Human contact! Burn the witch! It could not have been 10 seconds, and yet it seemed a long time that their hands were clasped together. He had time to learn every detail of her hand. Ew. He explored the long fingers, the shapely nails, the work-hardened palm with its row of calluses, the smooth flesh under the wrist. Georgie boy, do you have a hand fetish atop of everything else that's wrong with this? This is getting creepier and creepier. This is the exact opposite of dreamy and romantic. I know what you're going for with this novel. It's the power of true love trying to stand up from the oppressive regime that systematically destroys your ability to feel, man. Boy, does it sound cheesy and corny now that I read about it. And creepy, that one too. Merely from feeling it, he would have known it by sight. Oh, wow! In the same instant, it occurred to him that he did not know what color the girl's eyes were. Or her name, for that matter, but who cares about that, right? She's hot! Am I wrong, Georgie boy? They were probably brown, but people with dark hair sometimes had blue eyes. To turn his head and look at her would have been inconceivable folly. With hands locked together, invisible among the press of bodies, they stared steadily in front of them. And instead of the eyes of the girl, the eyes of the aged prisoner gazed mournfully at Winston, out of nests of hair. And so this became a love triangle. Love is in the air. What more can I say about this chapter and the direction this book is going for? Again, I knew the romantic angle was eventually coming and it was going to be the central narrative event of this whole novel for whatever thematic direction and path the author wanted to take it, but I was expecting a little bit more from a George Orwell novel, which is apparently the most influential science fiction novel of the past 50 years. Oh my gosh. That was the end of the chapter, by the way, and make no mistake, folks, I am done for the day. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is hysterical for all the wrong reasons. I still cannot believe this is happening. We've spent so much time building this world and the oppression therein. We spent so much time gathering the thoughts of a man consumed by paranoia and despair and said aforementioned oppression, and then it becomes a high school romance in the middle of it all. And yes, I get it. It's supposed to be the innocence and purity of the feeling of love, making this oppressive existence somehow bearable and worth living. But the way everything leading up to it and the way it is actually described is high school level at best, creepy as all hell at worst. He memorized every single detail of her callous hand just by touching her for 10 seconds. Oh my gosh. This book has not aged well. Now I can say it with utmost confidence. There were pretty definitive clues beforehand, but now it's just becoming difficult to get through. And I'm just going to leave it at that for today. I think I said everything that needed to be said. You've heard about my opinions about it. Should I continue reading this? Is it becoming interesting and intriguing for all the wrong reasons? Is it funny to hear me grovel in despair? Is that even the right word? It doesn't matter. Is it even worth it to just listen to a guy going nuts over an old book? I don't know, you decide. Ugh. So next time on Orwell High School Drama, will our hero and our heroine get together? And will the evil big brother principal get in the way because love is so unorthodox? In an unintelligible grunts? Find out next time on the next exciting episode of 2 Hearts and a Callous Hand. I'm just going to stop the recording now. Oh boy. See you around, you unhappy people and proles.